Usability testing comes down to seeing how your users interact with your product, and it's really that simple. It's taking people basically off the street and giving them your product, giving them a set of realistic activities, sometimes called tasks, to do, and then seeing what happens. Where do they have a great experience, and where does the interface work exactly the way they had expected to, and where do they hit moments of confusion or frustration, and then how does that impact the experience? Because you ask people to think out loud and share their thoughts as they're using the product. In these moments of frustration or confusion, they might actually tell you what they had expected to happen or what they think a link means, and so you actually get some ideas for how to improve the designs. Ideally, you would be able to just kind of watch over people's shoulder as they're using it in their natural environment. So if you have an app for ordering food, you kind of would want to just like watch people at home on their phone or at work ordering food. That is a research method. It's more ethnographic. But even then, if you're actually literally looking over people's shoulder, it becomes a less natural situation. Usability testing kind of takes a little bit of that context away and says, now imagine that you have this activity, imagine that you have to order food, go do that. There are situations though where someone might actually be, in the process of booking a flight, or they might still have to book their flights for the holidays, and you can bring them into what we call a lab, and then actually just ask them to book the flight that they were intending to book all along. It's still not gonna be like on their own time when they want to do it. It might not even be on their computer. And so you're taking a little bit of that sort of natural environment away, but still learning so much, because if even in this somewhat more controlled environment they have trouble, they're going to have more trouble at home with lots more distractions going on. I definitely recommend inviting people to usability sessions. Because if you watch your users interact with the product and they struggle, that creates such empathy for your customers, and you want to fix the problem for them, that if you do that in isolation and you see that and you observe the problems, and the people who either assign the budget for your team or for usability testing in general don't see it, they don't see the benefit of it, or if the designers and engineers that have to actually go back and fix the problems don't see what comes out of that, they might not believe you. They feel like it's just you saying what you took out of it, and you can really create change by having them come see real people trying to use your product, especially if there's moments where they struggle or have confusion. It's one way to really change people's mindset and have them see how important usability is. One thing I want to clarify about usability testing is that it can be done both qualitative and quantitative. Now, if you don't know anything about research, I'll explain what those mean. It comes down to whether or not you need numbers and sort of hard facts to prove a point. So if you're trying to say our interface has 15 usability issues or this one problem, we expect 80% of our users to have this problem. In order to draw those conclusions, you have to run a study with a really large sample size so that you can be pretty sure that what you see in your study is representative of the whole world of your customers, especially if you think of benchmarking yourself against competitors. So are we better than our competitors, and how much so better, or are we doing worse? Or benchmarking yourself against yourself in a previous point in time. So you can say we're going to run a quantitative usability study in April and then again in December. After making all these big changes, we want to know what improvement did we see. So if we want to be able to say it takes people 30 seconds less to complete this task and 30% more of our users are able to complete this task successfully, those kinds of statements require a much larger sample size. I'm going to just throw a number out there, at least 20 or more participants, to be able to draw conclusions like that. The type of usability testing that I'm much more interested in is qualitative usability testing, where you actually run the same study on a much smaller subset of users, typically like anywhere between 3 to 10, kind of depending on your situation. And and the interface that you're testing. And you can't then draw conclusions. Like if you do a study with 8 participants and 5 out of the 8 of them have a problem, you can't draw any conclusion about what all your users might or might not do. What you do know is that that's probably a big problem because 5 out of 8 people had that problem. And what I hinted towards before is getting the insights from the study. So not only do you know that there's a problem, but because people are thinking out loud, you're learning what they had expected to happen or what they think something might mean. And sometimes users even give recommendations. I usually ignore their recommendations if it's something like, I don't like green, I like blue better. But once in a while, users will actually say something like, oh, I really wish it had this feature. I really wish I could do this thing. And it's amazing what that insight will spark either in a discussion with the design team. And so if we think about the goal of usability testing really being to drive change and create change in a product and to improve the interface, there are more frequently time points where it can be helpful to do a qualitative evaluation of your system so that you can kind of figure out what are the big issues, the low-hanging fruit, fix those, and then keep going rather than doing large studies less frequently. You can run your own usability study. And so I'm going to say this to anyone, all of you listening, all of you taking this course, you can do this. You have the resources and the manpower to conduct a study because at its simplest form, literally grabbing someone off the street or someone who works down the hall or someone at Starbucks and asking them to look at your design and even just tell you what can you do here, what does this company do, or give them a question like, show me how you would do XYZ can be really, really insightful and really helpful. And so this is typically called hallway testing, where grab anyone, you ask them a few quick questions, definitely limited in scope and kind of what you can ask, and you also have to sort of keep in mind that you don't know that much about who the participants are in the study, but it can still give you some really great insights into what works and what doesn't in your product. One step up from hallway testing is setting up some kind of lab. And so this is typically called lab-based usability testing, where you could rent an office somewhere, you could use your office, quiet office somewhere, you could even rent like a true official usability lab, which is really the same kind of labs that market research companies use for focus groups or things like that. But it's basically any environment, any setup, like what I have here, where there's a desk and you can sit with a participant at a desk. And it's a little more structured than you would do hallway testing. So you kind of plan your tasks ahead of time and you have to recruit participants to come to you to the lab. And then that gives you a little bit more control over who your participants are as well. And then you ask them to conduct certain activities. They conduct those activities. You watch to see what happens, where things work well, where they struggle. And you prompt them to speak their thoughts out loud. And if there's something where you think that there's a little bit more insight they can provide into why that was really great or why that wasn't so great, then you can ask them to kind of follow up on that experience. Both of those examples, so both hallway testing and lab usability testing, have the participant and what is usually referred to as a moderator, sometimes a facilitator, in the same place at the same time. So you're physically located with the participant. There's also a huge movement to doing usability testing remotely. Remote moderated testing, you don't have to recruit your participants to come to you. So scheduling is a lot more flexible. You can have them take the test at work, at home, anywhere they happen to be. And the only time they need is the time required for the study. Typically for lab-based usability testing, for remote moderated usability testing, a session takes 60 to 90 minutes. Remote, I've also cut it short in the past where because you're not physically with a participant, it's hard to build rapport and they might be distracted by stuff going on around them. I've done some really successful 30-minute sessions. Hallway testing can be anywhere from 2 minutes to maybe 10 minutes. The last type of usability testing that I want to talk about is remote unmoderated. So you're not actually in the same location as a participant. You're also not communicating directly with them. And so you set up a set of activities that you want a participant to conduct, and then they do that on their own time and record their screen, either their mobile device or their computer, as they're attempting those activities that you set out for them to do. And they think their thoughts out loud as they do them. And then what you get back as the researcher in this case, is video recordings of them doing those activities and tasks. Huge benefit there is that you can actually distribute this to a wide range of participants in a larger group and have them all conduct the studies on their own time whenever they happen to be ready for that. And so all you have to do is wait for the videos to come back and then analyze those videos on your own time. So it's a much easier scheduling situation. The biggest downside of that is that you don't have the ability to prompt participants to speak their thoughts out loud more if there's something that you thought was kind of interesting and they didn't elaborate on it. You also don't get to redirect participants if they might have misunderstood one of your activities or they stopped before you really wanted them to stop. It's really interesting to see where they would stop naturally, but sometimes even in a usability study, you want to sort of encourage them to keep going just to see what might happen if they made it that far. And so it's kind of weighing the pros and cons, a little bit your budget, also depending on where your participants are. So if you have participants in the UK, or that's where your users are, so you want participants from the UK, but you're based in the US, it can be really hard to set up a lab study because you either have to make your users travel or you have to travel. This is where remote testing is really, really beneficial and also has gained a lot of popularity.